You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hey guys, thanks for coming back to the show. You're listening to Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. And I'm your host, Steve Adams on Mighty Blue. And this is episode number 383 of the podcast. Before we start, I wanted to thank those of you who took the time to reach out to me after I spoke about the death of my son, Rob. Your many kind words truly helped me process his death a little bit. I'm not sure I'll ever get over the shock of it, but feeling your outreach was humbling. So thanks very much indeed. We've got a really interesting guest today. Dan Nobles is known on the trail as the Wandering Monk, and when I tell you that he's had two entirely different careers, I'm really not exaggerating. Today we talk about his military background, his deep and abiding faith, as well as his fascinating approach to hiking and the trails that he's hiked. Dan will be on in a moment. And for those of you who feel that our show is already too long, well, disappointingly for you, we're going to be even longer than normal today. Our class of 23 will figure, of course, but we'll also hear from two other people this week. I'll introduce them as we go along. So let's get moving. Here's the Wandering Monk, Dan Nobles. Our guest today is Dan Nobles, known on the trail as Wandering Monk. Hey, Dan, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Well, thank you much, Steve. I appreciate it.
Now, you were a military man for much of your life, and I wanted to start there. Tell us a little bit about what you were doing in the military until you made a pivotal decision in 2007, which we'll come to later anyway as well. So what were you doing what was your military life like?
Okay, well, I started out as an enlisted man. I was a sergeant when I went to officer candidate school. And then I had a career as an Army officer. I was an engineer. My undergraduate was engineering. And so I served in the Army for my first 10 years as the typical Army engineer officer, going out, doing construction projects and that kind of thing. And then I switched in Germany. I was sent to Bosnia to start working on the plans for the NATO relief of the UN there in Bosnia during that conflict.
Wow.
At that time, my career shifted to become a planner. And so for the next 20 years, I was a strategic planner in the Army.
And I know you were, you told me some mind-blowing figures the other day. I know you had an office in the Pentagon and you had some quite a tidy budget to deal with, didn't you? How much was your budget? Or is that classified?
Yeah, I had a for this Alabama boy that grew up in the sticks with not much. I was responsible for a lot of the Army installations, and I had a operating budget of $7 billion.
I've never had
just a small budget.
I've never spoke to somebody who said that to me before, by the way, so I'm pretty pleased with that straight away. So you're a bit of a big deal in the Army. And what sort of level were you at the time?
Okay, I was a colonel. I wasn't a big deal, but I sort of
$7 billion. Trust me, $7 billion is a big deal. I reckon the combined budget my other 380 guests have had is less than $7 billion.
But it wasn't mine. I was entrusted with the monies. But yeah, we cared for Army installation, maintenance, construction, land acquisition, those kinds of things around the world. So it was a quite large budget.
And you've always been a man of faith. We're going to come back to that as throughout this conversation. And you're in the military, and you made this decision in 2007 to retire from the military, when in fact there was a good chance you could have been moving up and probably got more of a budget to work with. So tell us about that.
Yeah, that's true. I had my Army career had been sort of underwritten with the opportunities to serve others, not just serving others as a military officer would, but even the positions that I held, I could take care of those who worked for me. And I gained a lot of of satisfaction out of service. And so I had also, as you mentioned, a man of faith, and desired this service to extend past my career. So I, in 2007, had made the decision to retire after about 32 years in the Army.
Right.
I retired and went to seminary and started an entirely different chapter of life.
That is an extraordinary change. And this is something that we kind of touched on when we spoke before, but I want to talk about it a little bit more if we can now.
Sure.
Is there a disconnect, you feel, between having a deep faith and planning for war? Because by and large, that's part of what you did, isn't it?
Yeah, it was very much of what I did.
Yeah.
Yes, it was. There is, I would say, a tension. It may seem paradoxical. We do, from my faith, I realize that we live in a fallen world. We live in a world that does have conflict. And if no one of faith steps into those places where we are engaging the rest of culture in not just caring, but also protecting, then I think it's an important role, especially for a person of faith, to step in and contribute from that perspective, while at the same time understanding that we have a great duty to protect those who need protecting.
That's a very laudable. That's a very laudable idea. Does that fit in with the idea of the Army, though? Are you allowed to operate as? No, I want to get this right. Are you allowed to operate as a man of faith and bring your morals into your decision making?
I never felt that I was not invited to do so. I relied heavily in Holy Scripture. Romans 13 talks about how that God uses the governments to protect. And so that, for my own self, allowed me to have some of that balance. There's a great body of theology on just war. I relied heavily on that. And on the military side, I was always invited to make sure that I could speak into that. So I never felt restricted in any way.
Right. It struck me one of the things you actually said. You said, if our emphasis, this is what you said when we spoke before, if our emphasis was on the sanctity of life, then we'd be better. And I think, whether you believe in religion or in religious faith or not, I think we can all agree that would be a good thing. I quite agree with that.
Yes.
And where were you? Well, I know where you were, so tell me. You had an office in the Pentagon, but you were kind of not involved. But you were. I was looking at one of your videos this morning. You were doing something on the 10th of September,
Yes.
2001. So tell us what you were doing without giving your secrets away, and then tell us how you reacted.
Yeah. Actually, what I was doing, I was in the middle of a year-long study for the Secretary of Defense, Secretary Rumsfeld.
Mm-hmm.
And the study was to look at where the U.S. forces were deployed and stationed around the world. We had pretty much stopped at the end of World War II of where that war ended. And so those were the bases around the world that where American forces were.
Uh-huh.
Rumsfeld, being very much a visionary, wanted to know if those were the proper places. So I had this huge study to consider, where should we be if we had a blank map?
Right.
And on that day, I had traveled to Missouri, to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, to speak with a group of Army leaders about Army installations and looking at where should we be and how do we leverage the infrastructure of the world to promote our military strategic goals, if that makes sense.
It does, yes. And that, once again, is a laudable goal, but things flew out the window somewhat after that.
Did.
Yeah, so you obviously the next morning you were going to carry on doing what you were doing, but then obviously life changed as we know it. What did you do?
Well, I was actually I was running. I took my morning run, my jog.
Yeah.
I came back into the hotel room, turned on the television, and like the rest of the world, saw the
Yeah.
towers. I called my office in the Pentagon. I spoke to my boss, which was a 3-star admiral, and he told me, Dan, you got to get back here. We have a problem. And I said, well, yes, sir. I see the problem,
Yes.
and I will be back as soon as I can get there.
And at that stage,
So,
that stage, the plane hadn't flown to the Pentagon, had it, when you first spoke with them?
No, this was in that small window interlude between.
Wow.
And so as I was packing my bags and watching the news and getting ready to go to the airport to catch a flight back to the Pentagon, I thought, then the plane hit the Pentagon.
Right.
And the first reports were it hit exactly where my office was.
Good Lord.
That was it was an erroneous report, but that was the first report that it hit my office. So immediately I tried to call back again, and of course all of the phone lines were down. And so I drove to St. Louis, Missouri, to get my flight. Was told that no flights were going out,
Yeah.
so I actually commandeered my rental car
Of course you
and
did.
drove all night through the night from Missouri to Washington, D.C.
Tell us about that. Tell us about that, though. Sorry, you're once again as a man of faith. Did your faith sustain you that day? Because I suspect it must have been a hard thing to hear, because you probably thought some of your friends had been killed. I'm sure some of your friends had been killed.
Yeah, I lost a lot of friends that day.
So what was that journey like?
Well, from a faith perspective, without my faith, I don't know how I would reconcile anything.
Right.
And so it is that faith, which again, Holy Scripture says is the evidence of things not seen,
Right.
is that I have to trust in that there is something out there that's still in control, even when the world seems like it's out of control and total chaos.
Yeah,
There's got to be something, and I believe it's God,
Mm-hmm.
is in control. And so that sustains me, and it gives me a foundation, and it gives me a vector that I can go in.
So you're a military man. You had this horrendous experience. It must have been a terrible experience. You must have felt it terribly personally when they went into the Pentagon as well. And at this time, you then worked another 6 years, you retired, went to seminary, and you took up ministry.
Yes.
Such a difference. and at this time,
Yes.
you weren't actually a hiker at all, were you? How did you get into hiking?
Well, in fact, as we talked about it, I said when I retired, I would never put on a backpack.
That's
again.
right, yeah.
Had no desire to do that.
Yes.
And then my brother, who was in the Marine Corps, my entire family was military.
All right.
My brother, who had been in the Marine Corps, called me and asked if I would go and hike a section of the Appalachian Trail with him.
Right.
And I said, no, have no desire to do that. That's not in my wheelhouse. And so he starts teasing me about Army and Marine Corps.
Of course he did.
And of course he couldn't, So then I took the bait and said,
Sucker.
okay, I can. Yes, I was. He nearly killed me. We hiked those mountains. That was not like anything I'd ever done before. And I was, at that time, I think I was 55 then.
Right.
And out of shape. So, because I hadn't done much since I retired and went to seminary. But when I got back home, it was like I'd been bit by a bug. And there was something compelling about the trail that I just had this call to go back. And that's when I took up hiking.
So have you thought about what that was? What was speaking to you out on the trail?
I have thought about it a lot. I think what it was in that seclusion, if you will, or isolation a little bit, or, that there was a time when I could spend time with myself, just myself. And that was a piece that I was missing. And there was where I started to find healing and I've written this little book called School by the Smokies, where I talk about healing on the trail.
Yeah.
And that's where I found a sense of potential healing, which I think has really helped me through the years. There is healing on the trail.
Well, I was watching a video of yours this morning on your YouTube channel. I'm going to put a link in the show notes to that. And it was about why I hike, or why you hike, obviously. Why do you hike? Why do you hike?
Yeah, why I hike is for that healing. I said that hiking is a soulful experience, meaning it's body, mind, and spirit, and it exercises all of it. And I think we are created that way, where we're not just physical, we're not just mental, we're not just spiritual, we're a soul, which is a combination of all of that. And on the trail, I start hiking, and I think I told you about hiking up to Shuckstack Tower and hiking up that mountain. Yeah. And again, nearly kill me.
Yeah, exhausting. Remember it.
and so physically, it drained me. But at the end of that, I started to pick my trail legs up, and it wasn't as physically demanding so much. But mentally, it starts playing games. And then I have this game of I'm being selfish. I should be at home with my family. And when I realized that, no, there's a difference between self-care and selfish. And in self-care, if I'm caring for myself in order to serve others, that's okay. And so once I worked through that mental piece, then I got to the spiritual. And there, what it was, I still remember it. I was sitting on the side of ironically, it's called Preacher's Rock. And I'm sitting on Preacher's Rock there.
No, that's too perfect. That's too perfect.
Looking out over this, vista of mountains, and realizing that it's not just the creation is out there and I'm sitting here looking at it, but I'm part of this. I'm part of this cosmos. And in there, again, I don't know how else to describe it. There's healing once I start to realize my place in the midst of all of this other stuff. And that's what hiking does for me.
It's interesting you say about it being self-care and not selfish. One of the themes that's come up in the last couple of weeks in our podcast has been when people go on a through hike, which is 6 months, so that is quite a long time away from the trail, from a family generally. It is quite selfish to do it. But you're saying your hiking, especially the shorter hikes, were helping you able to help and be present with your family, I presume.
Yeah, and I would say that even the long hikes, we all have different needs. Yeah. When I was, again, reverting back to the Army, when I was still on active duty in my last assignment, I had a tour of all the installations in the in the world. I had to go and visit every Army installation in the world. Wow. And at the end of that 3 months of touring, I came back and I briefed out my boss, and he said, "Well, what have you found?" I said, "What I have found is that when you visit one Army installation, you visited one Army installation. You can't say this is what they're like. Right. This is what that one was like." Sure. And for our own hiking, we're the same way. Our hiking, each hiker has a need. And a through hiker, I personally don't consider that. It could be selfish, but I would first consider it being self-care. When I'm watching the hikers that are in this current class on YouTube, it appears to me that each one of them, they're finding healing, and it's self-care, not selfish.
It's certainly a joy I saw in people when I went to trail days this year. And it struck me in the past, actually, Dan, where you go to trail days, even though I've been one of those through hikers, you have to be a through hiker that year to feel that way and be that way. I was observing these people were having the time of their lives, kind of wished I could be part of it. And even though I was only a year or two away from it, I wasn't part of it that year. And they are so into that thing, aren't they? So that self-care thing, I can buy into that more, I must admit. And so when did the idea of a through hike start to actually form in your mind? Because originally that's what you were talking about.
Yeah, I was planning on 2001 to do the through hike. It started forming in 2000 as really an alternative. I had bought tickets. Two of my brothers were going with me. We were going to fly to France, and we were going to do the Camino de Santiago across Spain.
Yeah.
That was 2000. COVID hits. All of our flights were canceled.
2021, wasn't it?
Yes.
I thought you said 2001.
Oh, I'm sorry. I may not be going back to 9/11.
Okay.
It's my age coming out.
Yeah.
But anyway, 2020, when I was planning to do the Camino and that was canceled, I was looking for something. And that was probably the crux of my time that I really needed to get on the trail. Emotionally, I was, and I had all the COVID vaccinations.
Sure.
I've had COVID twice since, but what really, it wasn't the physical, but it was the emotional that I really needed to get out. And so I started planning to through hike the Appalachian Trail as an alternative, and took off on March of 2021 to that plan to hike the through hike.
And I presume, being a military man, you worked out the logistics pretty quickly. What was the planning process like for you? Do you enjoy that side of it?
I do. Yeah. I do. I enjoy it. I may overthink it, overplan it. I'm sure as we get ready to actually step out on the trail, we probably have inventoried our backpack a dozen times.
Sure. Not me. I actually pack the morning I go, but yeah, you carry on. I'm terrible.
I make sure everything fits in its place and everything, it feels right, and that I have everything I need. Yeah. But I do enjoy that. That's just part of it that I do.
So you were heading out on the trail. You were still looking for that solitude, I presume. What did you find? Because I love it personally, and I love the people on the trail. I love spending time with the people on the trail. You weren't finding a lot of solitude if you leave in March 21, were you?
No, I didn't. It was, that was the year right after they were getting back on the trail. Sure. I looked to see, what date I could leave, and I left on March the 9th. I believe that the ATC was trying to, artificial cap. I think they were trying to cap it at like 8,000 a day. No, surely not. Surely
50 a day.
Maybe it's 1,800.
No, not a day.
It was a huge number. Okay. They were trying to put this artificial, and I had dropped down below it, but then all of a sudden it came back up. I was in this bubble from the time I hit Springer Mountain. I did the approach trail, hit Springer Mountain, and then it only got worse as I got into the Smokies. It was terrible.
I've had this conversation with people before, how I think you can find solitude wherever you like on the trail. I think you can walk by yourself. You can deliberately go slower, deliberately go faster, stop by the path, sit down and so on. You can get that. I find you can get that solitude. Perhaps it wasn't enough for what you wanted. And I was watching this video, as I say, this morning, and you said that as you walk, you process. So my question is, you went out there in late March 2021. You left the military 14 or 15 years before. What took you so long? And why was the need still there to do this, have this solitude?
Yeah, that's a great question. My doctoral work is over stress. My dissertation was looking at spiritual leaders, but looking at how do you promote well-being, emotional well-being in leaders? Sure. And so stress, we can suppress it, but it's still always there. Yeah. There's an undercurrent. It's more like a festering wound. We can suppress it, but it's going to find a way of expressing itself. I had suppressed it because I had been busy. I had, from my Army retirement, then I went to seminary. I was studying toward my doctorate. I got my PhD. That was a journey in itself. And then I went into the hospital to work as a chaplain. I did that for several years. All always caring for others. I was invited to go to a 6-week course on soul care.
Wow.
Best course I ever went to. And then in the midst of that course, I realized that this was the first course in my adult life. Well, actually the first course in my lifetime that I went to look at how to care for me, not how to care for someone else.
Okay.
And it was at that time there was this stirring, okay, how do I find that? I knew I was sitting in my office one day. This may be a trail that you want to cut out. I was sitting in my office one day, and I was visited by the owner of a kennel who raises service dogs for PTSD soldiers,
Sure.
sailors, airmen, Marines.
Yeah.
And we were talking about strategies of how he could socialize his dogs. Well, my phone went off, my email went off, and the tone on the email, I hear it. And one of the dogs who was laying in my office, he stood up and he came over and he laid his head in my lap. And so the owner of the kennel said, well, what about your PTSD? I said, I don't have PTSD. Well, that dog thinks you do.
Wow.
Because that's what he does to put pressure on someone to help them sort of feel.
Wow.
And
that must have been emotional.
Yeah.
I can see it still is. I can see it still is.
It still is. So anyway, I start to realize that, there's wounds here that I've never acknowledged.
Right.
Wounds from Bosnia, wounds from the Pentagon. Those were my main areas of loss.
Sure.
And so, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, it's. I suppose part of this conversation is around how you got where you got. And why you got off when you got off and so on. Because you didn't, most of our guests come on here, they do a through hike or they almost do a through hike. You got to the NOC, I believe it was, and then you got off because you had an illness in the family and so on. But you weren't really getting the solitude you needed. Do you ever regret leaving the AT on that through hike attempt?
Sometimes, yeah. I got off at the NOC, went home to take care of my sister-in-law, who was, we didn't know at the time, was terminal. Right. Came back a week later, got back on the trail at the NOC, thinking I was still going to through hike. Got to the Smokies. Of course, the bubble has now grown.
Yes.
Get through the Smokies, and I'm trying to plan how am I going to do the next part. And my wife calls and says her sister is really bad.
Right.
And so that's when we made the decision that I would get off trail and we would actually move from North Carolina to where we live now here in Kansas.
Right.
to help her sister and my wife's aging mother.
Right. So you went back, but so you may be done with the AT at the time, but hiking certainly wasn't done with you, was it? Because you then got involved in you wanted to do these lesser traveled hikes. So, I mean, and bear in mind, of course, you can always go back to the AT one day, just so you know. It's going to be there. So what are these less traveled hikes and how does that fit into your idea of the solitude?
Yeah, I think from a solitude perspective, they actually are better because these smaller hikes are places that many of us have never heard of. Many have never heard of the Prairie Spirit Trail. You may have heard of the Pinhoti.
Oh, yeah.
You've probably heard of the Foothills Trail, in the Carolinas.
Yeah.
May not have heard of the Fiery Gizzard, which is a great trail.
No, I think I ate one of those the other night.
But there's all kinds of the Cherokee Trail I just finished. It was about 185 miles, but this is a trail less traveled. It had not been transited since 1861.
Good Lord.
So, trying to do the research, piece it together to do it. And on that trail, I met nobody.
Wow, really?
So it was awesome.
And how many miles was that?
It was 180 miles.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
the only time I would meet someone was when I would go into a town.
So you get that peace that you want. You get that time to think and heal and all those things from those trails. Are you looking for the same thing every time you go out there, or do you go on each trail looking for something specific?
Not really. I don't really go looking for something specific other than the trail itself. I hike. There's an old ancient way of prayer called Lectio Divina. It means more than what you want it to mean, but there's this old ancient way that you read a scripture and then you just sit and meditate with it.
Sure.
You don't try to understand it. You just read it. And then you read it a second time. And this time you're looking for something to pop out at you, a word, a phrase. You read it and you sit and meditate. And then you read it a third time. And this is the time when you answer, how am I going to respond to this? And then you read it a fourth time just to rest. I try to hike that way.
Wow.
So when I start hiking in the mornings, I'm really not looking for anything other than what I see. What does the trail show me? And then about lunchtime, I start reflecting on, okay, what have I seen this morning? And then I spend the afternoon sort of responding to that. And that's when I usually actually do most of my video, because my video is an expression of that response.
Interesting.
And then at night, when I tuck in at night, I sleep, and I sleep like a log. and so I that's the way I hike.
And you know what? Maybe you're not suited to the Appalachian Trail then. You know, that is such a party trail anyway. And I can see why that would be, especially the way you phrased that just now about you think about what it. So in many ways, you are looking for what the trail gives you. So you're looking for something to come out of every single one. When you finish those hikes, have you taken something from all of them?
Yes.
And that's normally in a spiritual context.
It's in a soulful place. You know, sometimes I remember how difficult some of these trails were. Again, the Cherokee Trail. There was a 15-mile road walk on a paved road that I had to do.
That sucks.
That was just exhausting. Nimblewheel Nomad, he and I have talked quite a bit, and Sonny, he loves road walks. I don't. I like the Green Tunnel personally, my favorite, but I don't care for road walks. But I had it, and so physically it was exhausting, and I still remember that. But I remember it in terms of, okay, the first Cherokee wagon trains that transited this trail, when they were going out through the middle of the prairie and not knowing where they were actually going. I knew they were going to California, but not anything really more than it.
Sure.
How did they feel? And so that's where the mental, emotional connection starts in from that, what that trail gives me.
Yeah. I can see that. And funny enough, and we kind of touched on this also when we spoke before, does the solitude you're looking for, does it actually make you better, or are you simply managing the pain and keeping it at a certain level? Or, are you making progress? In other words, is this ever going to be, are you ever going to go hiking and not feel the need for the solitude?
I don't know. To be real honest, I don't know. I do know that it is making me better. I know that 10 years ago, I would not have been able to talk to you about the Pentagon.
Right.
I know 10 years ago, I would not have been able to talk about Bosnia.
Sure.
And I can do that, and I'm fine. I may get choked up a little bit because I'll remember some friends, but it's not debilitating. Before it was like, especially when I was ministering in the hospital and working, one of my units was oncology. So I worked around a lot of death, and there was, I call them boxes. We store our different types of memory in different boxes. And that one box started rattling and rattling hard.
Right.
And I went to a counselor, and we talked it through. And thankfully he was also a veteran, so I could talk it through with him. And from that point, and going back on the trail, then I started processing. And today, no, I don't. I don't think it impacts me. Certainly doesn't impact me like it used to.
Do you know what? That explains that what you just said explains to me something I wrote down from the video this morning. And it's because you were talking about as you walk your process, but then you said you should express and share those thoughts with others because as you say, as you share, the words don't traumatize others, but the words relieve your pressure.
Yes.
And I was thinking, how is that so that happens? And it happens, I presume, because you're almost expunging them from yourself. You're not going to get rid of that memory. That memory is always still going to be there. But talking about it with others, I can see why that relieves some of the pressure on you. Yeah,
it really does. And I think I was specifically, there was an incident in Bosnia that happened that was very, very traumatic. I mean, it was terrible. Mm-hmm. And if you want to talk about it, we can. But I had bottled that up for 10 years from my wife because I didn't want her to be scarred like I was scarred.
Right.
And it wasn't until I got through the Smokies and got off trail that I had processed it enough to say, dear, I want to share this with you.
Wow. How did she take it?
And she loved me the more for it.
Because it didn't traumatize her, did it? It didn't traumatize her.
Not at all.
Because, that makes sense to me. Of course it does. You're telling a story. No one has experienced what you've experienced, but that you're sharing, you're almost trusting somebody to share that story with them. So, you know what? I'd love to. That's a terrible expression. But yes, what's the story about Bosnia then?
Bosnia we were in Sarajevo, and the Serbs had gone through that area, and we had gone into a hospital, and the Serbs had gone through this hospital and slaughtered many of the patients in the hospital, which, that's a horrible thing to see, but I've seen death, but it wasn't until I got to the maternity ward and I saw the pile of babies. And so when I was in the hospital, I was working when we would work when we were on call, we were there for a 24-hour period. We never left the hospital, so when everybody else went home on the chaplain staff, one chaplain stayed behind, and that was me. And that weekend, we had 6 baby deaths. So I dealt with 6 deaths of infants, whether they were newborn or whether they were very young, 6 months and younger. And I worked with the families, and I worked through it with the families. But when I got off duty, I was a wreck.
Yeah, I bet.
All of that was flooding back.
Yeah.
And I had to tell the director, I said, I can't go back into the maternity unit. Don't send me back in there.
Wow.
I worked the oncology, I worked behavioral health, and I worked the emergency room. Those were my normal units because nobody else wanted them. And I could work those, but I could not work the maternity. And it wasn't until I processed that now I could, and I can share that. And it's horrid, it's tragic. And it enhanced my need to understand that we need to value life. Life is too precious. We can't create it. We can't make it. I don't think we have any right to take it. So there is a dichotomy.
Yeah. I hope people would have been telling me, asking about Bosnia. So I felt I needed to ask you about it. And what about the monk maxims? What have you learned through hiking that you use as a maxim? Because I think we ought to end on a high, I think.
well, one of the things I'd use is something that I typically sign off with of my videos. Many of my videos, I'll say, look, stay safe, stay healthy, stay on the path.
Right.
And people think, okay, he's talking about don't get off the path, and it's much more than that.
Mm-hmm.
It's a need to know, why are you out there, where are you going, and stay the course. That's more of that monk maxim of staying on the path. And then when I mentioned that, one of my friends, she lives in Belgium, and she said, but, sometimes you have to step aside to see more. I said, well, I'm going to use that.
True.
That's a great maxim. Sometimes you have to step aside to see more. So I wrote an entire chapter on that, that Kat had mentioned. But yeah, I've got these little maxims. One of them is, if it feels wrong, stop, because it probably is. Mm-hmm. And that came from, I was hiking and my shoulder I felt like something was stabbing me through the shoulder. And once I stopped and looked, my shoulder strap, I had my sternum strap turned inside out. Ooh. Over the top of my shoulder. The strap was turned upside down. It was digging, and I was so stupid, I didn't even stop to look at it. So yeah, all of these things the trail teaches if we will just be good students and learn.
It certainly does. Well, look, I always think the expression "thank you for your service" is a trite expression, and I hate saying it. But I think in your case, I'm happy and proud to say thank you for your service and really helping people understand some of the things that you've talked about, and hopefully we've taken the time to discuss on this. And I just thanks for you coming on the show, and I hope you enjoy all the rest of your less traveled hikes.
Well, I thank you very much, and I appreciate when people say thank you for your service. But I really feel I was honored. I mean, I was this dirt poor kid from Alabama that
$7 billion budget,
terrible high school student. But yeah, I love the expression. I think it's a British expression of punching above your weight. And I love that expression because that's been my life. I feel like I punch way above my weight because I've just been blessed and honored.
Sadly, I punch a lot lower than my weight. That's because I'm so heavy. But I thank you. I thank you for coming on the show, and hopefully we'll run into each other one day.
I would love that. Maybe we can go hiking together.
That would be nice. Cheers, man.
Yeah.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
What a fascinating individual. On a $7 billion budget. That's hilarious. He was clearly an accomplished senior guy, and yet so modest and humble. I took so much away from our conversation. I hope you did. The apparent conflict between war and faith. I thought we handled that beautifully. His clear thought process about the difference between selfish and self-care was, to me, revelatory. We've been talking about a through hike being a bit selfish recently, but he turned that thought right around. And then his 4-step approach to hiking. Fascinating. If you've ever doubted the ability of the trail to heal, then this will be the episode to listen to. Thanks, Dan. Now our class of 23 and 2 of our remaining members of this class. First up, we hear from Mark Carpenter, who, last time we heard from him, was going really well, about to head home for a week. Here's Mark.
Hey, good morning, Mighty Blue.
Hey, Mark. How are you today?
I'm doing good.
It's early morning, and I've been following you. I'm going to come to what you wrote to me after, but I've been following you on Facebook, and one of your themes that keeps coming up is you're very, very tired all the time. So, what's going on?
Yeah.
What's going on?
I think it's just trying to do a lot of miles, and with it warming up, just slowing me down.
So what sort of mileage have you been getting up to then?
I'm usually around 17 to 20 most days.
Yeah.
But I think with the weather and doing the consecutive days, I need to take a break, just listen to my body.
Are you taking a break today?
I took a break yesterday.
All right.
It was calling for lots of rain, so I decided to set that one out.
And did they have it?
Yes, this time.
Yes, the weather forecast is nowhere near as reliable as we want it to be, and especially in the mountains, isn't it? I've been there where there's wind lashing around, but rain is clearly all around me and not being touched by it. And in the same way, I've been looking off a mountain being pelted with rain, and it's beautifully sunny down in the valley below. So you just never know how it's going to go, do you?
That's true. That's true. I've taken a day where, because the forecast was calling for rain, and nope, it was all blue sky. I'm like, wow, I could have been hiking.
Yeah. So you're back on it, and you went home for a while. What's it like being home?
Oh, it was great. Yeah. I loved being around the family and especially the grandkids. So, it is tough to come back after being home.
It was
Things
it?
are so comfortable.
It was, yeah. I bet it was. Yes. Did you consider not coming back?
No. I'm committed to get it done. Yeah.
I mean, how many miles are you into it so far?
I am just over 1,500.
Wow,
yeah.
That's a mark, isn't it? 1,500 miles. I think when I say to everybody, someone says they've done 700 miles or 1,000 miles, that ain't nothing, is it? It's a long darn way.
I know.
And you feel like every one of those miles, don't you?
Oh yeah.
So what did everybody think? What was it? You were home and your family could see you, and obviously people like to put eyes on people, don't they? They can see whatever they like on Facebook, but when they put eyes on you, what did they say to you?
Oh, so I've lost a lot of weight. I mean, I know I have lost weight, but I didn't realize I'd lost that much weight.
How much? How much is it?
I think it's still only like 20 pounds, but it's, I guess it shows.
It shows in your face always, and I could see that in your pictures as well. And I don't even know you that well. I mean, I know you obviously through this, but really, I'm sure your family was some of them quite shocked about it.
No, I think they. I went home partly because my nephew was getting married.
Right. Yeah.
And he was. I think he was feeling like, boy, I need to lose some weight. He kept telling me how much weight I lost, and I think he was a little jealous.
Yeah, I bet. So you had the wedding. You got back on trail. You got back on July the 5th? It says here, as you planned to do, and you got back with your son. And apparently, it was for those 3 days. It was the hottest and most humid to date. So how did he cope with it?
Oh, he was struggling as much as I was. I mean, he's 30 years younger than me. He's athletic. He's in shape. But he struggled just like I did. And I think we were not taking in enough water.
Right.
And I think we both was having a touch of like heat exhaustion.
Sure.
I mean, we were just beat.
It's one of those things, Mark. I don't think we realise. I mean, I made the mistake again. Even I did 5 days back on the trail a couple of weeks ago. I don't think we realise how much water we need until we get out there, and probably until we get home, we realise we're a little bit dehydrated. This dehydration, it comes upon you, and as soon as you feel it, apparently it's too late. You should have had a drink before. So you trying now to be more regular with your drinking and more intentional.
Yes, yeah, and I'm carrying more water. I'm carrying 2 liters plus like a Gatorade or a Powerade or something like that on the side.
Right.
And when I get halfway point, I make sure I fill up, just to remind myself to keep drinking water and get those electrolytes.
Sure. And having gone home, when you came back with your son, you'd obviously, anybody else you'd been hiking around, you probably lost them by then, hadn't you?
Yeah.
Are you hiking with anybody else now, or are you by yourself again?
Pretty much by myself. Recently I ran into a couple of hikers that I have seen before.
Right.
But our paces are not the same.
Right.
And our mileage is different as well. So really haven't found that person like I did from the beginning, where I can just match up and go day to day with them.
Do you prefer it with somebody, or do you prefer it by yourself?
I'm adapting by myself, but I definitely prefer to hike with someone else.
Especially coming up to New Hampshire, Maine, and I don't want to worry the family here, by the way, in case they're listening. You really want to be in a situation where someone's got your back around there. But you'll be hiking around people all the time, won't you? Just kind of make sure you can see somebody around you most of the time, and don't go up in crazy weather because it can get pretty crazy up there. But You've already had tons of crazy weather already. And actually, before we talk about that, I want to talk about the drive-in you went to in Warwick. I've never heard. Well, actually, I've heard of it before. I've no idea where this is. So, what was it like, and how close is it to the trail?
Oh, it's close. I mean, you can get to the drive-in from the Warwick Turnpike,
Right.
just a couple of miles. If you don't pick it up there, you kind of hike around the trail where it comes again at 17A.
Mm-hmm.
But from that point, it is, I think it was about 6-7 miles, but we were lucky to get a ride.
Right.
But it's great. It's at a drive-in theater, and there was lots of tents that were set up.
Nice.
It was great experience. The thing is, at least I was so tired. I couldn't really stay up to watch the movie.
So what happens? So it's a drive-in, but are there cars around as well?
Yeah, the tents are at the back of the drive-in,
Right.
up on a hillside.
Right. Oh, cool.
All the cars are out front.
How cool.
They'll rent you a radio. Yeah, it's a great experience.
Oh dear, yeah. Oh, I think I would if I were to go, I would definitely do that. But now talk about the weather. You just went through Bear Mountain a couple of weeks ago. Not a couple of weeks ago, a couple of days ago, I guess. And you've got just there have been amazing amounts of rain, but apparently you got through just before the rain.
Yeah.
What was it like? I mean, the Bear Mountain itself is quite a stretch, isn't it? You're climbing, aren't you?
Oh, yeah. And I had seen the forecast. They were calling for an inch or two, and then behind it, maybe 3 to 4 inches.
Wow.
So my intent was to get out and hike as much as I can, and then I would have a shuttle pick me up. Because I think it was what I saw was going to rain around 1 or 2 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to about 10:30, and then the skies opened up.
Oh gosh!
But I was past Bear Mountain at the time.
Oh, nice.
And so my shuttle driver was able to pick me up, but there were people and day hikers and hikers alike that had to get pulled off of Bear Mountain.
I'm sure
it was the videos that I've seen. It was just crazy, like flash flooding going on up at the top of the mountain.
And it wasn't just at the top of the mountain, was it? I mean, obviously all around. So even though you got through it, you actually had the rain. So how bad was it then?
It was bad. I mean, the Fort Montgomery, West Point area got at least 5 to 7 inches of rain.
Wow.
Yeah, they were saying it was like the 1,000-year flood.
We have one of those every couple of weeks. Which, the math doesn't work out there, I'll tell you. The 1,000-year flood.
No.
That's bullshit.
Yeah.
Oh, no, that's hilarious. So you went through there.
Yeah.
Don't you think it's weird going through that bloody zoo? Well, not only the zoo, as you get off the mountain, you go through the park where there's people barbecuing, although they probably weren't actually at that stage because the weather was so bad. But then you go.
It was the day before. So there were lots of people there.
Oh, right, there were. Okay, blimey.
Yeah,
right. And you go through the zoo. I found that both times kind of unsettling to go through the zoo. You've been amongst all this beautiful nature, and suddenly you're not anymore, and you see these animals in captivity. I had a real downer against that zoo both times, in fact.
I thought, because it's like a paved walking path.
Yeah.
I mean, it was kind of surreal. You didn't feel like you're on the AT
no,
anymore,
it doesn't.
for sure.
It really
it's
doesn't.
like a little day outing.
Now, you texted me on Saturday, and your last comment was, I don't know what to do about Vermont at the moment. So from your understanding, where is the trail in Vermont? Is it still open in place, or has it been rerouted a lot? Because I saw Miss Janet put something on Facebook the other day. It had been rerouted in certain places. Is the, what do you call it, the grapevine? You hear stuff through the grapevine and shelters and so on, and also on far out as well. What are people saying about Vermont around you?
Well, I had a hiker that I was around before I got off trail. I know he was in Vermont, so I've been texting him, and he's saying there is still people hiking. I've been monitoring the Green Mountain Club, who maintains the trail, and they're constantly doing evaluations. And they say it's not unsafe, but there is some reroutes going on.
Right.
And so there's more rain coming, though, and that's the thing. I really don't want to skip Vermont.
No.
But obviously, if they've got massive flooding in some of the towns, it's a mess, and I don't know. I don't know what to do about it just at the moment.
But
Get another week, I guess.
But exactly, once again, this is what you have to do on the trail. You have to manage your expectations. You have to manage where you're going to go. You have to make sure what's safe for you and what you can do. So if it comes to it, when it becomes unsafe, then you'll know. And they'll either close it, or you'll just decide to skip forward, do it, and then finish. And, you could go up to all the way, you could skip Vermont, do most of New Hampshire and Maine, get to Abel Bridge, come back and do Vermont, and then go and do Katahdin to end. Because I know that's what you want to do in it. You want to end at Katahdin.
Yeah, that's definitely what I want to do.
Yeah.
But I want to do it straight through.
Yeah.
But,
you know what?
I gotta overcome that if it's unsafe.
Yes. Get over it quickly. Oh, dear.
Yeah, there are some hikers that I've been around that they're talking about skipping it and coming back just to give it more time to
Sure.
get cleaned up and dry out.
Yeah. And you want the whole experience in a good way. Vermont is relatively muddy at a lot of stages, so I can't imagine how bad it is now. It's must be shocking. So I would think about that if I were you. But I know we all have our designs and what we want to do and how we want to get it done. But you have to manage that yourself.
So true. Yeah.
Okay,
be safe.
All right, well, enjoy it. I'm glad you've had a rest, and I'm going to be watching you on Facebook. Just make sure you rest when you need to rest, okay?
Yeah, I'm definitely going to be more mindful of that.
Yeah, you got tons of time, mate. You got tons of time, so don't worry about getting there. You'll be there, so it's okay. All right, then. Speak to you soon, all right?
Okay, sounds great.
Cheers. Bye.
All right, thanks. Bye.
I follow Mark on his Facebook page, and I keep hearing from him how weak he feels and how the heat is sapping him. It's something he needs to guard against, and happily he appears to be managing his height really well. Let's hope he's able to continue, if need be, by missing out Vermont and heading back there after Katahdin. As we said, it's all about managing your hike. Now let's hear from Mary Miles, who has some sad news to share. Here's Mary.
Hi, Steve.
Hey, Mary, that's so much better.
Oh, good.
So let's get straight into it.
Okay.
You said that you sent me a text, and the saddest thing about that text, of course, is that Wiley's no longer with you. So what's actually happened?
Well, the 4th of July weekend, it was so hot.
Yeah.
And, I said all along, as soon as I felt that he was not having a good time or his health was being compromised, he would go home. And so I made that decision to send him home.
Right.
He was just exhausted, just exhausted from the heat after a long hiking day. So, it was hard for me to do that, but for his welfare, that his health had to come first.
Yeah. Well, you know what? It's you've always said that the moment you thought he needed to go, he would go home. So had you been noticing things for the last couple of days, or did this come on suddenly?
Oh, it came on suddenly. He was doing fine. His energy was there. His weight has been perfect. His pause perfect. Enthused every day to get up and go. It was just the heat, and I knew it would happen again.
Right.
So I just decided to pull the plug, and as hard as it was.
Yes, I'm sure it was emotional. So how did that change your hike then, Mary?
Well, in a sense, it's easier without him.
I'm sure.
I can push myself more, because I would stop early on in the evening because of him, because that's a lot to ask of anyone to walk over 12 hours a day.
Sure.
So, I think I'm pushing myself a little bit more. It's easier in town, to find places.
Of course,
that, I don't have to worry about finding accommodations for him. But I miss him terribly.
It's not going to put you off, though, finishing, is it?
Oh, no. 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 And I said that from the beginning, too. If he has to go home, I'm going to continue. So, He'll be there waiting for me.
Of course he will. Yeah, of course he will. And it'd be a great reunion when you see him. Is this still fun for you though, or is this now becoming more not a job but more of a challenge to get done?
Well, it's hard. It is a challenge to get done because the trail is getting harder. With the weather, the heat is making it more difficult. But I have no thoughts of quitting.
Good.
No thoughts at all as far as not finishing. I still want that. I still want to touch that sign.
Yeah, it drives you on when you get down days. You still think of that side. I'm going to touch that darn thing. I really am. And when we last spoke,
I'm so close. I passed 1,500 miles today.
1,500 miles. Where is 1,500 miles then? I'm trying to think where that is.
Falls Village. This little
in
town
Connecticut.
in Connecticut.
Yes.
Yes. Oh, I'm loving Connecticut.
Yeah, I did
all
as
these
well.
Little villages and hamlets. It's just beautiful.
Now, talking of not beautiful, last time we spoke, you were on your way to Port Clinton, which was that incredible downhill. How'd you cope with that downhill?
Well, that wasn't bad, but no one talked about that climb out of Lehigh River up to Palmerton. No one talked about that cliff. My goodness.
How did
Wiley? That was treacherous.
How did Wiley cope with that?
I climbed up first, thinking, he would follow me, and I got up to the first ledge, and he couldn't do it. So I took my pack off, went down, took his pack off, and had to scoot him up from behind.
Wow.
And I was just like, please don't fall backwards.
Wow,
lean
yes.
backwards.
Yeah.
But then I had to do it a third time because I had to go get his pack.
Oh, jeez.
But it's much easier without my pack on my back.
Yeah,
and it was right after a resupply, so you're at your heaviest weight, and it's like, oh my Lord, that was kind of scary. And I had a hiker ahead of me that was taking pictures, and the look at the pictures, it was even more scary to see it in the pictures. So.
Yeah, those pictures are great, aren't they? When you look back down at how high you've come up, it's quite something.
Yeah.
And you say that Pennsylvania wasn't kind to you generally. You fell 3 times in 2 days in the text you sent me. How bad were the falls?
I left a lot of skin behind. So the first time, my arm and my right leg were cut up pretty bad.
Right.
The second time, just a palm got torn up. But the third one was on my left side and really banged at my knee pretty bad. But fortunately, just bruised. There was no injuries there. So, I was able to keep it going.
Sure. And you got through New Jersey, which you say was a walk in the park.
Yes.
And you're now in Connecticut, as you said, and we're recording on Thursday, July the 13th, and this will come out next Thursday. You've had some horrendous weather there, haven't you?
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, in New York, the first 3 days in New York poured. And, of course, there's those slabs of rock. Different than Pennsylvania, know, and if they're dry, you can just go right over them with no problem. But when they're wet, they're so slippery. It's like a slip and slide.
Yes.
So it took a lot of patience, and it really slowed you down. I think that got to me, just being so nervous about falling again.
But have there been trail closures up there in New York? And I know you're headed to New York now. How bad is it in Connecticut now then with the rain?
There were some brooks, like the Guinea Brook was, I was told the day before it was impassable. Oh. When I got there yesterday morning, I just went through it. It wasn't that bad. It was raging, but it wasn't that bad. I made it across, so,
So you're still at it. Are you hiking with anybody else now? And now you're not with Wiley. Are you with somebody else now?
No, I'm not. I mean, I meet a lot of people, and I'll hike with them maybe for a day or 2 days, end up at the same location.
Sure.
But everyone seems to be faster than me. So
I'm going to tell you,
and that's fine.
You've done 1,500 miles. Don't you worry about not being fast enough. You're going to be
no.
just fine. 1,500 miles is a long way.
Yeah, it would be nice to have someone, for a long period of time to be with, but I don't crave that. I don't need that.
Do you see changes in your mentality when you're out there? Things you think about. Are you resolving anything in your mind, or is it just having an adventure?
Oh, I'm having an adventure. This was my retirement gift to myself, my vacation. And I've never worked so hard in my life. You hike 12, 13 hours a day. That's like, oh.
Happy vacation.
But, yeah, it's been fun. I'm loving every minute of it.
That's cool. Well, look, I'm so pleased you're still enjoying it. I'm sad that Wiley's gone. I'd love to have seen him, get through all the way. And I'm sure you would, but you've done the right thing. There's no question about it. You know your dog better than anybody else, and you love your dog more than anybody else does. So you've done what's right for him. And at the end of the day, Mary, when you get back, it could be so pleased to see him. He'll be so pleased to see you, and you would have done the hike. So, it's all good.
Yes, I believe so. And you know what, Steve? We saw our first bear.
You saw your first bear? When? Where?
I did. Right out in Palmerton there when we climbed that cliff.
Right.
I was putting my backpack back on, and I heard Wiley growl, and I turn around, and there he is up on the ledge.
Wow.
I mean, just not even 20 feet from us. And then, he just turned around and went the other way.
How'd you feel?
Cared less about us.
Do you like it?
Oh, I was excited. Oh,
yes.
He was beautiful.
Yeah.
His fur was so shiny black. He looked so healthy. Yeah, it was great. And I can't wait to see another one.
Do you know what, Mary? That's absolutely one of my big takeaways. I remember going through the zoo in New York, and there were the black bear enclosure. And they were just brown, matted skin, matted fur rather. And yet I saw in New Jersey just a day later. Was it a day later? Not in New Jersey. I saw somewhere in New York, actually. A day later, this magnificent bear running through the woods. They're fast. They're not lethargic. And as you say, this beautiful black coat, isn't it?
Mm. Yeah, they need to be out in the wild.
Yeah, very much.
So tell me what I'm going to be seeing soon.
Well, you've got Massachusetts next. I enjoyed Massachusetts. A lot of people didn't seem to, but they've had a lot of rain there. There's a lot of washed out stuff there. So you're going to have to be careful, I think, on the path that's ahead of you. You really are. And then, of course, you've heard about New Hampshire and Maine. It's tough. Yes. But if you're steady and, you just do less miles, but it doesn't matter because you've got plenty of miles in the bank already. So you'll be fine when you get there because you'll be able to cope with it because of all the miles you got in your legs. So I wouldn't worry about it at all.
Good.
And just look forward to the exciting views you're going to get, which are spectacular.
Oh, I am. I can't wait.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, good talk to you. I'm sorry I messed up last time, and
no problem.
We'll catch up with you again soon. Okay.
All right, Steve. Take
Cheers
care.
Then. Bye.
Bye-bye.
So Wiley's gone home. I'm sure Mary's missing him, but I'm equally sure that she'll be freer in a hike going forward, particularly in the tougher northern states. I know that Wiley was a great companion for her, but you really need to look out for yourself in those states ahead. I'm sad to see him go, but frankly, I'm happy for Mary's hike. A few thanks this week with a bumper week of donations, so thank you all. Our recurring donors were Sabre Thompson, Todd Withrow, Ron Ward, Suzanne Johnson, Betty McEnany, Michael Garsh, Sharon James, Ann Pickin, Sean Dead-Wiley, Emmanuel Brother Ramos, and Kevin Whiteman. We've also had some terrific individual donations from William Baird, Stephen Venter, Kimberly Mondonedo, Dave Wheeler, Alan Hansen, Stuart Phelps, and Dana Hitt. Thanks to you all. Now, you may recognise some of those names as past guests on the show. Believe me, you don't have to pay to be on. But I like to believe that those who have been on have enjoyed the experience and appreciate what I do in putting this show together. If you'd like to support what we do, then head over to hikingradionetwork.com website and click on one of the many donate buttons there. And while I remember, you can now be on the show, remember you don't have to pay for it, and share your story. There's a link in the show notes that allows you to register as a guest. We've already had some responses, and the first conversation will take place soon. So come and share your story with the hiking world. Believe me, you may not think you've got a story, but I know you have. Now, we're having a bit of a diversion. I met a guy in 2019 who I referred to as the other Trigger. He was through hiking that year, as Trigger and I were, and we had dinner together. We've kept in touch, and when he told me about something he's about to do this coming week, I asked him to come on the show. Let's hear from the other Trigger, or John Dupras. I'd like to introduce you now to a man I met on the trail in 2019. He's a guy who refers to himself as the other Trigger. This is John Dupras. Hey, John, thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, good morning, Mighty Blue. Glad to be here.
So you're the other Trigger, of course, because I was hiking with my Trigger. In fact, we had dinner one night, didn't we? And I can't remember where it was. Was it Bland?
No, it was in Marion, Virginia.
Marion, that's right, yeah.
Yep, and we went out to a Mexican place, and I was kind of late to show up to the table, and I plopped down in the vacant seat, and I was right next to you.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. And you were the other Trigger, which was pretty cool.
It. Yeah.
So we, as I said, we met in 2019, and we've communicated over the years a little bit, and I think we actually communicated before for some reason. I've got it in my mind. And having done the AT, you've turned your eyes to your next adventure, or maybe it's not your next, but there is a new adventure coming up. And I offered to get you on the show to promote it. So tell us what it's all about.
Yeah, thanks. I'll be glad to talk about it. The reason, the event is called Ragbri. Everybody calls it Ragbri. And of course you say, what the heck does Ragbri mean? Yeah. And it's the Register, which is the big newspaper in Des Moines. Register's annual great bike ride across Iowa. Uh-huh. And it starts on the western end of Iowa at the Missouri River, and it finishes on the eastern side of Iowa at the Mississippi. So it's 500 miles long this year.
That's a long way.
Yeah, this is the 50th event, and I'm not really a big cyclist per se. I've done a couple of 150-mile 2-day runs, rides for MS and multiple sclerosis, but I did those before the AT, and that was in 2015 through 2017. 2018, I was training for the AT, so I didn't ride then, and then I hiked in 2019. But anyway, a guy that I met on the trail in July of 2019 in New York, an Iowan by the name of Lex Dannenbring, and we ended up hiking together for about 10 days before circumstances parted us. But he's a Vietnam vet. He's about 4 years older than me. So we kind of clicked, both being veterans, and he began right away to talk about Ragbri. And of course, I asked, what the heck is Ragbri? He kind of roped me into this. I was planning on doing it last year, but my wife had a ski accident. So that put the kibosh on that because I had to take care of her pretty bad, severe injury that she had to her right leg and her left wrist. But anyway, I committed this year. I plunked down the money and all that, and we're ready to kick it off on the 22nd of July at the gathering at the expo in Sioux City on the western end of Iowa. And then we ride for the next 7 days across the state. And
so where do you stop?
Yeah, there's multiple stops during the night, during each day. The longest leg on this ride will be about 86 miles. Most days are 65, 70, 75 miles, somewhere in there to get the total of the 500 miles. And we stop each night at a designated overnight town. Probably going to be 25 or 30,000 riders. So it's going to be a moving circus from one side of the state to the other. It's just amazing. And the logistics to do something like this is like moving a military organization from one side of a country to the other.
So how does that work then? If 25,000 people descend upon a small town, big town, whatever the towns are, that's still something to absorb those people overnight. So how do they actually do it?
Yeah, it's amazing, and I'll probably be able to talk about it much better after I do it rather than
Sure.
right now.
Yeah.
But each one of the designated overnight towns is stacked up with volunteers, and all the vendors will be there. There'll be food. There'll be big time entertainment each night at each of the overnight towns, to include a couple of bands such as Spin Doctors, Leonard Skinner, and several others. So it'll be quite an event. But the organization supplements the help with the various cycling clubs that are throughout Iowa.
Sure.
I've joined my buddy Lex's club, Cedar Valley Cyclists, and so we've kind of got our own logistic support for that. But if you just joined as a regular rider to do RAGBRAI, they will provide trucks and shuttles to move your bag of stuff from one town to the next.
What a wonderful community effort that is then. So, and what I want to know about it, is it, I know you're doing this for multiple sclerosis. Is the whole thing for multiple sclerosis, or do people choose what they raise? And do they have to raise money to do this?
No, you don't. All you really need to do is plunk down the entry fee to be a participant in it.
Okay.
And then you're covered from the start to the finish, to include moving your stuff.
Cool.
But they do, obviously, there's plenty of people that will be raising money for various events, and I chose to do multiple sclerosis for this one, and so far it's gone pretty well. So
is there a personal connection that you have with multiple sclerosis?
Yeah, there is indeed. So when I was a young high school student, we lived in Randolph, Massachusetts, on the South Shore of Boston. And one of my best friends, Paul Cuniff, his sister, Elizabeth, and we call her Fizzy, she was 2 years older than us, and she was my older sister's age. So they were friends. And Fizzy was full of energy. She was a great athlete. You know, she just had the world ahead of her, and about 18 years old was afflicted with MS, and she's been battling it ever since. And today, I think Fizzy should be about 70 or soon to be 70 years old.
Wow.
And she's plugging away. She participates in a bunch of events as well to raise money. And I was honored that she actually even donated to my fundraising effort for this RAGBRAI event, which is pretty cool.
And what are you hoping to raise? How much are you hoping to raise?
Well, I set a goal of $2,000. I've already exceeded that. I've got about $2,420 or something to that end. So I exceeded my goal, but I will gladly accept any of those donations that may come as a result of this, because it goes to MS, which is a great charity that I've supported over the years.
So if people, and obviously people listen to this, will have some connection. Some people will have connection to MS. I mean, people choose to donate to charities that resonate with them, obviously. So if this does resonate with any of our listeners, we'd love you to support it. So how can people actually help you then?
Yeah, well, actually, I have a MS page, and I'll give you the link to that perhaps after the call.
Yeah, I will put that in the show notes then. Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
right.
And it's pretty simple. I mean, people can go there. They'll read what I wrote up about my personal connection with Fizzy, and also the father of a dental tech from years ago, who's much younger than me. He's been battling it as well, and they can read that. If they chose to make a donation, they can click a button and it'll automatically go to MS. And I have nothing to do with the money aside from, collecting it as part of my fundraiser. Sure. Yeah. And that'll be a great thing.
Well, look, we met through hiking, and this is still an outdoor adventure. So I'm absolutely happy for it to be on the show. And as I say to listeners, if you feel that this is something you'd like to support, just click on the link. It'll be clickable in the show notes, and you'll be helping John on his way. So I appreciate you coming on and telling us about it, John.
Super. Appreciate it.
So, and please remain the other trigger forever.
Okay.
Okay, buddy. All right. Take it easy, okay? Okay.
Thanks. Cheers.
Bye. That's a darn good cause, and I take my hat off to John for doing it. Quite a logistical nightmare, I'd imagine, but good on him. If his story meant something to you, we'll have a link in the show notes so that you can donate to the cause should you so wish. I'm also going to include a picture of his friend Liz, or Fizzy, as well as a link to the race itself. Well done, John. Now, earlier I ran through that list of donors, and one of those donors was Kim Mondonedo. She wrote a note that said, in honour of Garmin, aka Joanne Flagg, and Sheepdog, who never left me on the main AT when I was in distress. Naturally, I was intrigued. So here is Kim and what happened to her, as well as how Joanne, or Garmin, and her partner Sheepdog responded. Now, I'd like to speak to somebody who has a direct relationship, I guess, with one of our class of 23. This is Kim Mondonedo. Hey, Kim, how are you?
Hi, Steve. Nice to see you.
Well, you mentioned, you sent me a message the other day. In fact, we spoke also straight after. I was still in my car. I was driving somewhere. I can't quite remember where. But you told me a story about one of our class of 23, Joanne Flagg, or Garmin. And it was quite dramatic, actually. So would you like to share with people what you were doing and what happened and how Joanne helped you?
Yep. I would like to share it because I really wanted to bring some honor or recognition to Garmin and to her hiking partner, Sheepdog. I was coming off the Baldpate East, which is between Grafton Notch and Fry Notch in Maine, and it was torrential rains. This was last Monday, and I had my dog with me, so I thought your recent podcast with Nancy East was really interesting. I had just negotiated all of those really kind of difficult obstacles, and was feeling very proud of ourselves, my dog and I, and kind of on the flat getting to the Fry Notch lean-to, and I figured, heck, I'll just make it an early day. I'm not trying to impress anybody. I'll go and warm up because it had been raining all day and we were absolutely drenched.
Yeah.
And twisted my ankle going through a river, and down into the river I go. It was very little river. It was probably a stream only about 4 inches deep.
Sure.
And I felt a crack and realized, oh my goodness, I am out in the boondocks in a pretty severe rainstorm with a dog and a 34-pound pack, and I am hurt. So 100 years ago, I was a combat medic in the Army, so I knew I had to kind of triage myself and realized I was starting to go into shock. I was scared and cold, and that's kind of the worst thing, although there are other bad things.
Not moving as well is probably one of the things that's the worst thing to do, isn't it?
Yep, especially since I was still in about 4 inches of water. It wasn't super cold, but I was getting cold. And I was starting to shake. So I crawled my way out of the water trying to figure out what to do. And my left leg hurt a lot, my ankle. And I thought, maybe I twisted it, maybe broke, but I've never broken a bone before, so I wasn't sure.
Sure. Just
giving myself calm talk. And eventually, I'll suffice it to say, I grabbed a couple of things out of my pack, my sleeping bag, because I knew my dog and I needed to, we're going to get really cold and we needed to treat for hypothermia if we could get to a lean-to. So then I managed to get up on my poles, and took 45 minutes to get to the lean-to after dragging inch by inch my pack out of the water. Got there and we'd started trembling, trying to get into the sleeping bag. We were shivering and shaking. And right then, and believe me, the whole time I was trying to get over to the lean-to, I was praying and cussing and whimpering and probably crying a little bit. And,
that's a winning combination, praying and cussing.
I was doing it all. That's right. And in came Garmin and Sheepdog, and they said, "Hi, how are you?" And I said, "I need help." And immediately, Sheepdog, it was a miracle, Steve. He years ago was a Marine paramedic, and he assessed my ankle and said, well, something's wrong. And we're going to get you out of here, but we all need a shelter in place. So he went and got my backpack, which I'd left further up the trail.
Sure.
And I was inside my sleeping bag. Garmin, God bless her, put her quilt over the top of me and my dog as we were waiting. And then once Sheepdog got the my pack back, I could change into my semi-dry clothes. You know how you always have a wet
Yes.
pair and a dry
Oh,
pair.
yeah.
And soon thereafter, I was at least not shaking so much. And next morning, it was a terrible night too. It was really, really storming in that not in the lean-to, and we even heard a tree fall.
Oh, wow.
And some other poor through hiker came through, and he was all mud covered, poor guy, but he slept outside in his tent.
Did you warm up pretty quickly? Did that really, did that do it? Because I've found this in the past, when you get too cold, sometimes you just can't warm. Did you warm up pretty quickly once you were covered up?
And I think it might have been after I put on the dry gear, maybe I stopped shaking within about 15, 20 minutes. But my feet, I was cold for a while, Steve, you're right. And actually the inside of my bag was wet too, because we'd huddled inside there. But no, it definitely took a long time for my extremities to warm up. I don't know, maybe a couple of hours at least.
Wow.
Yeah, you got really wet yourself, huh?
I've been soaked so many times, yeah. But you know what? And I remember once standing under a tree and hail coming down on me, and I was thinking my temperature just plummeted. So I said, "This is stupid. I can't do it. I can't stay here. I've got to do something. Just keep moving." So I just moved and pumped my arms like those crazy wrestlers used to years ago. The arms from side to side, and I warmed up.
Get your blood moving. I was trying to wiggle my toes, and I knew that was. You're right. The hypothermia is the worst.
Yeah. So the thing is, so you slept the night, and you obviously the cold, the worry about hypothermia had gone, but you still had a problem because you had your legs. So what happened?
I was really fretting because I knew these guys were through hikers, and I'm not a through hiker. I wanted to be a section hiker, but anyway, I knew they were really trucking through, and I didn't realize it, but at some point Garmin said, "Kim, we are not going to leave you," because I told her, "Hey, if you guys can at least carry my gear a mile or so, I can put up my tent. I can try to get out kind of a mile at a time." But she said, "We will not leave you," and that gave me. I'm kind of getting teary because it gave me a real sense of relief, and there was no way we could have had a rescuer. I guess people could have walked in and gotten us, but it was still, to me, pretty rugged terrain. Anyway, next day I ate a little bit, took some Motrin, and I knew I was going to have to just chug, take 800 to 1,000 milligrams of Motrin all day long.
Sure.
And Sheepdog had an ace bandage, so I didn't, stupidly. And I did have some duct tape, but it was really, it was not very sticky anymore. So he taped up my ankle really well, tight, and used his duct tape and some of mine and said, "Kim, put on your wet sneaker, tie it up tight, take your Motrin." They divvied up my gear, and we talked about my dog and decided that unless we heard voices, she would be. I had a leash on her, tied up. I really don't want to be a bad dog mom out in the woods. I don't believe in it. I agree with you, actually, Steve, about the dog. And anyway, but we'd let her kind of be free to some extent, but quickly grab that leash if we needed to. And I bound up my poles really tightly around my wrists, or just twisted around so I could have a very strong grip. And put on the wet gear, and at 8 o'clock started trekking out. And I had in my pocket my water, a compass, and I think some beef jerky and a little bit of food, and just figured even if it took me 3 hours, a mile, we had 4.5 miles to get out of there. And that was what happened. And it was basically, I don't know, maybe 8 inches at a whack. And a lot of it, Steve, as you know, is going up, going down, going over nubbly roots and rocks and erosion, grabbing hold of trees and doing the best we could.
So you were basically hobbling out slowly, and I'm just reading the message you sent me. You got out 4.5 miles. It took 11 hours to get there. You must have been exhausted.
I was pretty tuckered out. I was really tuckered out, but I was so relieved. And then, of course, it was really hard to link up with my son. But yes, I was really tired. But I tell you, I felt pretty badly for Garmin and Sheepdog, because they were trekking. They married up with a couple of their through hikers, BD and Pack Mule, I think, and they went on to Surplus Lake, and But yes, I was super tired because I'm not a through hiker.
But they stayed with you for the whole 4.5 miles?
The entire way, Steve. And then when we got to the intersection of AT and Big East Hill, I think that's what it is, East B Hill. They actually
East
put
B
up my
Hill.
tent
East B Hill,
because
yeah.
we weren't sure how long it'd be until one of my family got to me. So they put up my tent. Garmin went and got me water, Steve. She went back down the hill, got me water at that I don't know, at that river. Yeah.
I can't remember. But you know, what I would say to you is that while I wouldn't suggest to anybody they rely upon other hikers to get them out of a problem, if you're in a problem that you can't resolve yourself, I guarantee you 99, 95, 97, maybe 98 hikers out of 100 would have done the same thing. And I'm not diminishing what they did. I'm just saying to you, there is such a community out there that they would absolutely, most people would absolutely help you. The fact that Garmin's hiking friend was a former medical person anyway, that was pretty helpful, I got to say. But you know, I'm glad. It's always good to me to hear these good stories because we hear so much crap online and people misbehaving and so on. And the fact that, you know, you've got a first-hand knowledge of somebody helping you on the trail and putting their needs behind them for that day and putting your needs absolutely in front and center. So I appreciate you coming on and telling me the story.
Thank you, Steve. And Garmin talked to me the entire way and just kept giving me encouragement. And she even shared her food with me because I was having a hard time accessing it. God bless them. And I just hope if anybody in Maine or New England, because Garmin's a flip-flopper, so she's going to be going down south. I just would say, if you see Garmin or Sheepdog, give them love, give them appreciation. They are good people. And I hear you, Steve. I did not realize how welcoming the community is and how caring. But bless them because I know it put them way behind in their hike.
Actually, one last thing I was going to ask you. So what's actually happened to your leg? What was wrong with your leg?
I broke my fibula.
Oh, it actually was a broken leg. Oh, my gosh.
Yes. But I guess if you're going to break a leg bone, that's the best one to do.
How's it feel like now? How's it feel? Are you getting around now?
I have a walking cast, and I'm actually today. First day I started back to work, although I can do it remotely. And I'm getting around, and it's sore in the morning, but I can take a little bit of ibuprofen, and I just feel so relieved, actually, Steve, and I can't wait to get back into exercise. I know what you mean. And I will make sure that Joanne hears this and she knows the impact she's had. So thanks for coming on to tell us the story. Thank you for your beautiful podcast. I love hearing your stories.
Thanks. Cheers then. Bye.
Bye.
A bloody broken leg. Can you imagine hiking out nearly 5 miles with a broken leg? But as I said, Joanne and her partner helped in the way that the majority of hikers would help. That may be why Joanne didn't even mention it to me. But what a woman, eh? I'm proud of you, Joanne. Finally today, Jill Stefanos is ploughing through New Hampshire and finding that the miles don't come quite as fast as they did before. I'll see you next week. Sunday the 4th of September 1983, mile 1769.8. I hit the trail at noon today, meaning that I wasted no time in making things interesting in the White Mountains. I faced 15 miles of very rugged trail and currently night has been falling about 7:30. I seem to be unable to function anymore other than in a crisis mode. I may be growing addicted to risk and adrenaline. Today, I experienced generous portions of both. It was a steep climb, of course, out of Kinsman Notch, but much shorter than those awaiting me in the days ahead in Franconia and Crawford Notches. The surrounding forest initially was mostly hardwoods, with a few clusters of fir and spruce. Through the trees I had glimpses of a large pond below, just west of the notch. As I climbed, the hardwoods gradually gave way to the fir. The trail was grassy, and the surrounding woods were lush and green, moss-covered and carpeted with ferns. The Appalachian Trail slabbed the side of a low knob and reached the ridge crest in a very flat, grassy col covered by a large bog. The trail crossed the shallow water and deep black mud on a long series of wooden bog bridges. After the col, the trail passed through a forest dominated by dark fir trees interspersed with clumps of yellow birch. A mile from the notch, on a wide, flat section of ridgecrest, a side trail called the Dilly Trail led to the right across the plateau and descended slightly to a high rock projecting out over the trees and overlooking Kinsman Notch, with the buildings of the Lost River Reservation visible below and the minor northern peaks of Mooselock's Ridge on the other side of the notch commanding the scene. I absolutely had no time to waste taking side trails such as this one today. I cannot really explain why I did, but it was a nice view. From the Dilly Trail junction, the Appalachian Trail climbed steeply over a good-sized knob, descended into a shallow, very mossy col, and crossed a tiny trickle of a brook. It continued along the crest of that low, nameless ridge, crossing a series of rugged knobs and damp cols. Small bogs were scattered all through the cols and along every flat expanse of the knobs. Forests of the White Mountains, like so many of the major ranges, fall very close to the category of rainforest. Being this far north, they get a variety of more interesting weather as well. The forest was intense, a dense mass of fir with a few spruce and yellow birch mixed in. At occasional intervals, solitary white birch trees stood as lonely bright sentinels in the grey and deep green twilight beneath the conifers. Trees seemed to be growing out over every mossy boulder and rock outcrop. As dead fir needles fall to the ground, they cover the rocks and begin to decompose. Mosses grow on the resulting duff, holding it together with an iron grip. Then the trees can take root, often creating the amazing sight of a mature fir tree apparently growing directly out of or through a mossy boulder. After one last col, the AT ascended to the highest portion of the ridge, where three large knobs formed its summits. All three were heavily wooded, but the first one had a good peephole viewpoint through the trees, overlooking the Pemigewasset River Valley, the Loon Mountain ski area near Lincoln, New Hampshire, and a small portion of Franconia Ridge. A long, knee-killing descent led off that ridge, followed by a long ascent of the south ridge of Mount Wolfe, with one memorable view on the way up from a wooded knob topped by a huge hunk of exposed granite, which rose above most of the treetops. It looked back across the ridge towards Gordon Pond, a small secluded body of water sitting on a high plateau just below the ridge crest, near the col between that first nameless mountain I had traversed today and Mount Wolfe. When that climb finally ended at the east peak of Mount Wolfe, a short side trail led to another rocky outcrop with an excellent view of Franconia Ridge, stretching from the vast, naked granite expanses surrounding the summits of Mount Lafayette and Mount Lincoln, southward past the spiderweb network of rock slides which run like scars along the wooded slopes around Mount Flume's summit, to Whaleback Mountain's sheer naked cliffs. Much of that stretch will be part of tomorrow's adventure. Another steep, treacherous descent took me down off Mount Wolfe. It seemed endless, threading over slippery rock slabs, mossy boulders and exposed tree roots. The Appalachian Trail dropped off the ridge crest and wandered well down the east slope, eventually coming to a crossing of a large stream named Eliza Brook, the first running water I encountered today, larger than the trickle. Just before the crossing, a short side trail branched off to Eliza Brook Shelter, where I took a 20-minute break. The shelter was in a nice location, perched near the edge of a wide, flat, fir-covered ridge about 20 feet above the brook rushing through the shallow, boulder-filled ravine below. Someday I would like to camp there. Today I still had 8 miles to hike, and I had used up 4 hours on the first 7 miles. My chances of reaching Franconia Notch and the road by nightfall were looking, to say the least, grim. Nevertheless, the break was a good idea, because the ensuing climb up Mount Kinsman was a bear. The AT followed Eliza Brook back up towards the ridge crest. At first, it climbed on a weedy, grassy old woods road above the brook, but it quickly descended back to the water's edge, along which it climbed, often tortuously, over the boulders filling the ravine. The brook was a typical, very clear, very cold northern New England stream. It threaded its way through a narrow defile clogged with mossy boulders and old mossy blowdowns. I climbed past rushing cascades, small waterfalls, and occasional deep, quiet pools. Rocks were everywhere, piles of small, loose stones and long, flat, sloping slabs. The trail often squeezed through narrow spaces between boulders. It was rough going, and I gradually fell farther and farther behind. The going got tougher when the AT crossed the brook once more and climbed straight up the side of the ridge, crossing a few dry, shallow, boulder-clogged ravines. The ground was a mass of hummocks. The slow years had coated rocks with dead fir needles, and trees had grown upon and around them until the boulders were just soft-looking bumps on the forest floor. The AT finally regained the ridge crest at the shore of Harrington Pond, a small mountain tarn located in a high, flat, wet sag lying between a low, flat-topped knob and tall, brooding grey granite cliffs on Mount Kinsman's south ridge. The pond was surrounded by a desolately pretty marsh of knee-high golden-brown weeds and low water grasses. The marsh, in turn, was encircled by a forest of low spruce, stunted and gnarled by wind and weather. Grey trunks were covered by a green, scaly plant that made them appear leprous. At intervals, the bare, broken skeletons of trees that had lost their grim struggle with the elements gave silent testimony to the harsh, unforgiving climate up there, far above the sheltered valleys. It was a lonesome, beautiful spot, resembling something out of the subarctic. Although little more than a good, fresh breeze was blowing, it whistled through that high sag like the winds at the edge of the world, where the ancient map makers would write, "Here be dragons." The Appalachian Trail traversed the muddy shore on grey, weathered, old wooden bog bridges and began to ascend Kinsman's South Ridge. There were no dragons here, just another long, thigh-killing climb. The AT bypassed the cliffs which towered over the pond, but there were several great viewpoints atop rock outcrops along that climb, overlooking an immense L-shaped valley encircled by the lofty wooded heights of Mount Wolf, Mount Kinsman, and several of their spur ridges. The lower arm of the valley was a high plateau featuring bog pond, a long pond of irregular shape surrounded by an extensive marsh speckled with tiny pondlets. From that height, the marsh looked lovely, but also empty and barren, save for a few small groves of conifers. The upper arm of the L was the long wooded valley drained by Eliza Brook, sloping down to Bog Pond's plateau from the base of Kinsman South Peak. Some thoughtful power company had run a transmission line through the heart of Bog Pond, a long scar which detracted from, but didn't kill, its beauty. To the southwest, Mount Moosilauke and its lesser ridges dominated the view beyond the valley. East of them was Loon Mountain once again, and beyond that were the mountains and foothills trailing off towards the low lake country beyond the southern horizon. Interstate 93, which followed the Pemigewasset River Valley, knifed through the green foothills like an open grey wound. By this time, it seemed I had been climbing forever, but I could now see the crest of Kinsman's South Ridge rising above the treetops ahead, and my ascent still had a way to go. I eventually reached the ridge crest on a small, flat, boggy section covered with stunted spruce. From that spot, I finally caught a glimpse of Kinsman's South Peak, towering another several hundred feet above me. Make that a long way to go. The climb up the side of the peak was just as steep as the climb up to the ridge had been. It may even have been steeper, I don't know. I was too busy inventing creative new profanities as I climbed to pay much attention. It was late and getting later. 10 minutes later, I broke out onto the summit area of the peak, a short stretch of alpine ridge consisting of grey, lichen-covered granite rock, very low scrub spruce, and ground-hugging shrubs of the type which I had seen on Mount Moosilauke. There were 360-degree views, Franconia Ridge to the east, Moosilauke and Loon Mountain to the south, Kinsman's North Peak and Cannon Mountain to the north, and the valley and ridge country stretching out towards the Green Mountains along the western horizon. Not far above that horizon was the rapidly sinking orb of the sun. A pretty sight, but not too encouraging, considering the 6 miles I still needed to cover today. The summit was marked by a large rock cairn. The Appalachian Trail re-entered the woods for a gradual descent into a col and a short steep ascent of the North Peak of Kinsman. It was covered with another forest of stunted spruce, but a large rock outcrop just below the summit to the east provided the best views on the mountain of Franconia Ridge with all its spur ridges and of Franconia Notch far below. A few hundred feet below me was Kinsman Pond, another secluded mountain cairn sitting on a high plateau. To my north, Kinsman Ridge continued over several knobs known as the Cannonballs to Cannon Mountain, and its extensive ski area sloping down into the Notch. I enjoyed the views for 5 minutes before starting down another rocky, steep descent, along which my knees began to tell me how much they hated me, not in words, but with stabbing pains. About a half-mile later, at the point where the Appalachian Trail left the crest of Kinsman Ridge, a short side trail led to Kinsman Pond Shelter, located on the shore of the pond. I still had no time to waste, but the situation was already so hopeless that another side trip was not going to make it that much worse. I took a short break on the east shore of the pond near the shelter, at a spot with a wonderful view of both peaks of Kinsman across the water. The pond was another lonely place, surrounded by gnarled spruce woods. The west shore was lined with huge boulders which must have crashed down from the cliffs below the North Peak high above, and the bleached carcasses of dead trees that had been washed ashore by the waves. The sun had already set there, and a freshening wind was chopping the surface of the pond into small whitecaps. The AT descended off the ridge over sheer rocks on the Fish and Jimmy Trail, a cute, quaint name for a mean stretch of footpath. Steps installed on the rock faces made the descent possible, but not a hell of a lot of fun. Thankfully, this difficult stretch didn't last very long, and what the hell, my knees were already shot anyway. 2 buildings operated by the Appalachian Mountain Club sat on the shore of Lonesome Lake, a large body of water high above the notch. They were the first of the 8 AMC huts I will be passing along the Appalachian Trail in the White Mountains. They all offer food and lodging to hikers. The idea of spending the night there was very tempting, but I had someone waiting for me down below at the road crossing. I still would like to stay there sometime. It was a lovely setting. It was just before dark when I arrived. There was a captivating view of Mount Lafayette and the surrounding portion of Franconia Ridge. The summit was bathed in a pinkish alpenglow, eerily reminiscent of the golden alpenglow from my old daydreams of Katahdin, which reflected upon the still waters of the lake. I had a great picture set up, but some weekenders in a rowboat cruised right into my picture just as I was about to click the shutter. They were looking right at me, but I guess that they thought I wanted a bunch of morons in the frame, just to make the shot perfect. I didn't have time to wait for them to clear out. The light would not last long, and I was in a deep hole, well, an abyss really, for time as it was. I had to frame a lesser shot and shoot it quickly because they were making a beeline into that frame. The Cascade Brook Trail was the path on which the AT descended from Lonesome Lake into Franconia Notch. Its footway consisted of washed-out tree roots and large rocks. I went as fast as I could, and the trail gradually improved. It was dark for most of those last few miles, but I managed to move along by the light of my small pocket flashlight. There was one shaky moment when I took a spill and my light came apart with 2 pitch-black miles to go. But it worked once again after 10 minutes of groping for the scattered pieces and putting them back together in the dark. I was about a mile from the road when the footpath seemed suddenly to end at the bank of a wide brook. Crossing the stream, I could find no sign of a trail on the opposite bank. I was exhausted and hungry. An ordinary man would have panicked in that situation, but a thru hiker has powers far beyond those of mortal men. I calmly surveyed the situation and coolly threw myself on the ground, beating it with my fists and kicking it with my feet while I screamed, "I'm going to die in the wilderness!" Then I had a heart attack and died. Okay, what I actually did was backtrack along the trail until I found the true crossing of the brook several yards back. I had strayed off the Appalachian Trail onto a herd path. Soon afterwards, I was at the AT crossing of US 3 in Franconia Notch, almost an hour late at 8:55. It was rather depressing to have required 8.5 hours to hike 15 miles wearing a light backpack, but a hot shower, a good meal and a comfortable bed soon cheer me right up. Tomorrow, I begin a 4-day stretch of hiking the last of the 3 small segments of the Appalachian Trail, which I've backpacked prior to this adventure. I'm looking forward to seeing Franconia Ridge and the Presidentials again. After that, it will be all virgin territory for me, right up to a mountain in northern Maine I've seen only in my daydreams. 368.7 more miles to go.